This photograph of two young girls seemed completely innocent until historians discovered a dark secret hidden in the details. Dr. Natalie Chen moved the settings on her digital scanner as she prepared to look at more old photos from the museum's recently acquired Montgomery collection. As a senior expert on photography at the National Museum of American History, she had looked at thousands of historical pictures. But the next image in the pile made her stop. The photo from 1853 showed two teenage girls sitting side by side on a fancy bench on a plantation porch. On the left was a white girl of about 14, her blonde hair styled in curls, wearing a formal dress with a lot of lace. To her right sat a black girl of about 15, also wearing a nice dress. It was less fancy but still very elegant for an enslaved person, if that was indeed her status. "This is such a strange picture for that time," Natalie whispered, noting how close the two girls were sitting. Most old photos showing white and black people together showed a clear difference in power, with masters and servants never sitting as equals on the same bench. She carefully placed the delicate photo into the high-quality scanner. The Montgomery collection was famous for showing unique views of Southern life before the war, and this specific photo had already been in several books as a rare example of a close interracial friendship in Louisiana. As the improved digital image appeared on her screen, Natalie zoomed in to check the details. She carefully looked at different parts of the photo, taking notes on how to protect the old image. When she looked at the bottom of the picture, something caught her eye. A metal object was partially visible under the edge of the black girl's dress. She adjusted the screen to make the detail clearer. What first looked like an anklet or a decorative buckle turned out to be something much more upsetting, a fancy metal shackle disguised as jewelry, but clearly a chain attached to the girl's ankle. Natalie felt a shiver go through her. The supposedly sweet image of a friendship was suddenly turned into something much more cruel, a record of a prisoner made to look like a companion. "Dr. Whitaker needs to see this," she said softly in the empty lab. That evening, as she went over her notes, Natalie couldn't stop thinking about the sad look she now saw in the black girl's eyes. What had looked like a serious face for a photo now looked like quiet suffering hidden in plain sight for over 170 years. The museum's records were kept in a cold basement, a maze of history organized in boxes and drawers. Natalie spent the morning looking for any papers about the Montgomery photo. She found a yellowed folder from 1972, when the museum first got the picture from the Montgomery family. The letter with it described the girls as Caroline Montgomery with her companion Harriet. Dr. James Whitaker, the museum's director of research, looked over her shoulder, very interested in what she found. "Companion is certainly a polite way to describe her," James said with doubt. Natalie pointed to a note on the original list. The family claimed Harriet was a favorite house servant who was treated like a family member. "That is a common story people tell themselves," James remarked. He asked if she found anything about the ankle chain. Natalie said it wasn't mentioned in any of the papers, and she didn't think any other researchers had even seen it. They kept looking through money records and plantation lists that came with the collection. Among the lists of people treated as property, they found a note from 1851 about buying a 13-year-old girl for $800 to be a companion for Miss Caroline. "A companion," James repeated slowly. In a diary belonging to Caroline's mother, they found a more detailed note about getting a girl for Caroline. The mother wrote that the girl was polite and spoke well, and that Caroline was very happy with her new friend. The diary also mentioned they took steps to make sure she stayed, having a special metal arrangement made that was secure but looked nice. Natalie felt sick at the cruel words. They were describing a chain as if it were a special gift. More diary entries showed that Caroline and Harriet spent their afternoons reading together. The mother wrote that Harriet's education was helpful, but they had to make sure she didn't forget she was a servant. The gold chain was chosen because it was pretty enough for her to be seen with Caroline in public. "This is worse than I thought," Natalie said. "She wasn't just a slave, she was forced to act like a friend, while literally being chained up like a pet." James agreed and said they needed to see if this happened elsewhere. Natalie went to the National Archives to look for stories from formerly enslaved people. After days of searching, she found an interview with an elderly woman named Harriet Johnson from 1937. The dates and the location in Louisiana matched the girl in the photo perfectly. Natalie read the interview to James. Harriet said she was bought specifically to be a friend to the daughter, Miss Caroline. They dressed her in fine clothes and taught her to read, but she wore a gold chain on her ankle for 4 years. It was only taken off when she was locked in her room at night. James leaned forward as they read more. Harriet said they called it her special bracelet and told her it was a privilege to wear gold while others wore iron. But Harriet said a chain is a chain, no matter how pretty it looks. She said Miss Caroline liked to pretend they were true friends, and maybe she even believed it, but friends don't own each other. Harriet described how she had to speak well and go everywhere with Caroline to show off how kind the Montgomery family was. The photographer came for Caroline's 14th birthday and posed them together. Caroline was proud of the picture, but Harriet knew the chain told the true story. Harriet eventually escaped during the Civil War and moved north. She survived to tell her story, Natalie said softly, and now we can make sure people hear it. The end of the story was very powerful. Harriet said people might see the picture and think the girls are friends, not knowing one was property. That was how slavery worked. Sometimes it looked pretty on the outside, but there were always chains underneath. This discovery gave Natalie more energy for her research. She put together a team to look for more companion arrangements. Hay used a computer program to scan the museum's archives for similar photos of black and white children sitting close together. 2 weeks later, they found 43 potential matches. In 7 of them, they found hidden chains or ribbons covering metal bands. An expert named Marcus Johnson said this was a practice called companionate enslavement. It was very cruel because it forced someone to act like a friend while being held captive. Their research found more records from other states. A diary from Virginia mentioned buying a girl to be a playmate and having a silver chain made so it wouldn't look bad in public. It was a status symbol. Having a well-dressed, educated slave for your daughter showed off your wealth while you kept total control. The team found that this was common for daughters on lonely plantations who had no other children to play with. This wasn't a rare thing, Natalie concluded. It was a known practice hiding in our history. Natalie presented these findings to the museum committee. She showed the image of Harriet and Caroline and the hidden shackle. She told them they had to change how the photo was explained to the public. The museum director, Richard, looked worried. He mentioned that the Montgomery family descendants gave the museum a lot of money and sat on the board. Natalie argued that they had to be truthful about history. Dr. Eliza Washington agreed, saying they had a duty to be accurate since they had Harriet's own words. The debate went on for hours. Some were worried about the donors or public relations. Natalie proposed a new exhibit called Hidden in Plain Sight. It would show the original photos alongside the new discoveries and Harriet's own testimony. Eliza liked the idea of letting visitors discover the hidden details themselves. Richard eventually agreed that the evidence was too clear to ignore, but he said the Montgomery family had to be told first. As the meeting ended, Natalie looked at the picture of Harriet and felt they owed her the truth. Later, they met at a fancy law office with representatives of the Montgomery family. Eleanor Montgomery Williams, an older woman from the family, was very angry and said the museum was insulting her ancestors. Natalie calmly showed her the high-resolution scan of the chain. She explained that it wasn't a shadow and that they had Harriet's interview and the family's own diary to prove it. Eleanor turned pale as she realized she couldn't deny the facts anymore. The truth of Harriet's life was finally coming into the light. Richard tried to speak with a calm tone. He said that he understood this was hard information to process, but the museum was not trying to attack just one family. They had found that these types of habits were actually quite common at the time. My ancestors were respected people in Louisiana society, Eleanor insisted. She claimed they treated their people well for that era. With all respect, Marcus added, joining the meeting as their history expert. Forcing a young girl to act like a friend while keeping her in chains is not treating someone well by any standard in any century. The Montgomery family's lawyer cleared his throat and mentioned that the donation agreement gave the family certain rights over how the items were shown. He suggested they might try to get a legal block to stop the exhibit. You could try that, Richard admitted, but it would only slow things down. Dr. Chen's research is solid and will be published no matter what happens here. The real question is whether your family wants to be part of an honest look at history or if you want to be seen as people trying to hide the truth. At that moment, a younger member of the Montgomery family who had been quiet finally spoke. She suggested to her grandmother that they should consider a different path, noting that times had changed since the collection was first given to the museum. After some difficult talks, they reached an agreement. The Montgomery family would not stop the show, but they would be allowed to include a statement saying that while their ancestors were part of a system that is not acceptable today, they were also people of their own time. As they left the office, Eleanor stopped Natalie. She told her that she thought she was doing something noble, but claimed she was just stirring up a painful past that should stay buried. Natalie looked her in the eyes. Harriet could not tell her own story while she was in chains, but she lived long enough to make sure it was written down. Don't you think she deserves to have her voice heard now? With the negotiations finished, Natalie's team worked hard on their research. The museum had given the green light for the show to open in 6 months. Now they needed to build a full picture of how companion slaves were used. "Look at this," Emily called out from her desk. She had been looking at letters between different plantation families. She found a whole set of letters between the Montgomerys and the Whitfield family in Georgia talking about these friendship arrangements. They were basically sharing advice on how to do it. The letters showed a network of rich families who had started doing the same thing. Elizabeth Montgomery seemed to be the one who started the idea of the decorative chain, which was then copied by other women who thought it was a clever way to manage their companions. Marcus had been looking at money records. He found receipts from jewelers and silver workers specifically for fancy anklets and friendship bracelets. Some even had notes about making sure they could not be taken off without a special key. The team found that these setups were most common in wealthy homes with daughters between 10 and 16 years old. The enslaved companions were usually a bit older than the white children they served. They were chosen because they were smart and looked a certain way. They were often given special things like nice clothes and were taught to read, but they were always controlled through metal chains and mental pressure. "It is a very specific way of enslaving young women," Dr. Washington noted as she looked at the files. These girls were expected to provide more than just work. They had to provide emotional support and act like they truly loved the people who owned them. In auction records, they found that enslaved children described as good companions were sold for much higher prices. Some ads mentioned polite manners or a nice personality, which were just ways of saying the child could act the part of a friend. Most upsettingly, they found photos in family albums that were used as proof that the owners were being kind. In many cases, the chains were hidden just out of the picture or made to look like jewelry. They weren't hiding these setups, Natalie realized. They were actually proud of them. They saw it as a sign of their power, Marcus added. They didn't just own someone's body, they wanted to own their feelings and relationships too. They forced them to pretend to be friends while making sure they never forgot they were property. This new understanding made the exhibit much more complex. It wasn't just about showing hidden chains in old photos. It was about revealing a whole system of using people's emotions that had been covered up by nice stories. The team looked beyond their own museum, talking to other experts across the country. Their questions were met with both interest and pushback as other collectors had to face the truth about their own photos. The Historical Society of Louisiana found 3 more pictures with similar details, Millie reported. They also found a list of property that specifically named companion chains as valuable items. As news of the project spread, Natalie started getting emails from other researchers who had seen strange things in photos but didn't know what they meant. A pattern was appearing across the South, mostly among the richest families. Dr. Washington had been looking at old interviews with formerly enslaved people. She found 11 stories that described similar lives, even if they didn't all mention the fancy chains. Some talked about being locked up at night or wearing special tags that showed they belonged to the daughter of the house. The biggest breakthrough happened when they found a relative of another companion. A woman named Gloria Thompson told them about her great-great-grandmother, Rachel, who was forced into a similar role with a girl in Virginia. "My grandmother told me Rachel's story," Gloria said. "She had to dress up and play with the daughter every day, but wasn't allowed to talk to other enslaved children. She slept on a small mat in the daughter's room and was chained to the bed every night. Gloria still had a small gold cuff with a hidden lock that had been passed down through her family. Rachel kept it after she escaped so her children would never forget that evil can hide behind pretty things. The cuff was almost exactly like the one in the Montgomery photo, proving these were items made in factories, not just one-time creations. Their database grew to over 60 clear examples from the 1830s up to the Civil War. The physical objects combined with the written stories created a full picture of a part of slavery that no one had recognized before. Each of these photos tells the same story, Natalie said. It's a story of a friendship that was a lie, of chains made to look like jewelry, and of a childhood stolen away. The National Museum was full of plea on the opening night of the exhibit, which was called Hidden in Plain Sight, Captive Companions. Reporters, teachers, and the public filled the gallery. The main attraction was a large version of the Montgomery photo with a special light. When visitors pushed a button, the light showed the hidden chain on the girl's ankle. Around it were other photos with their secrets revealed through technology. Next to each image were the stories of the girls, taken from diaries and their own interviews. Harriet's words were printed in large letters right next to the photo where she had been forced to pose as a friend. "We are not just showing what was hidden," Natalie told a reporter. "We are showing how history can hide dark truths behind innocent-looking pictures. These girls had to act like friends while being physically tied up." The exhibit included Gloria's family gold cuff in a glass case. Visitors could see the pretty outside and the hidden lock that made it a tool for a prisoner. An interactive station let people look at old photos and find the hidden chains themselves, giving them the same shock Natalie felt when she first found it. The reactions were very strong. Some people cried while reading the stories. Others had intense talks about history and memory. Some descendants of plantation owners felt defensive, while descendants of enslaved people thanked the museum for finally telling this truth. Eleanor Montgomery Williams attended with her younger family members, keeping a serious face the whole time. Natalie saw one of the younger relatives crying in front of Harriet's story. Most importantly, the relatives of the girls in the photos were there as guests. Gloria Thompson stood proudly by her ancestors' gold cuff and explained to visitors that Rachel wanted them to remember the truth. As the night ended, Director Townsend told Natalie that the board thought it was the most important thing the museum had done in years. He said it was worth all the trouble. Natalie watched a young girl looking closely at Harriet's picture and agreed that it was absolutely worth it. A year later, Natalie sat in her office, looking at how much things had changed. The exhibit had traveled to 7 other big museums, starting new research projects across the country. Her academic paper had been published and was being talked about by historians everywhere. Over 40 more photos of companions had been found by other people using her methods. Most importantly, the project had started a movement to look more closely at old stories and photos for hidden evidence of how people were treated. Museums were now using new rules to study old pictures, looking past the obvious to find the real stories in the details. A knock at her door brought her back to the present. An intern brought a package from someone named Eliza Montgomery. Natalie knew the name. It was one of Eleanor's granddaughters. Inside was a leather book and a note. Eliza said she found it in her grandmother's things after she passed away. It was Caroline Montgomery's personal diary from the 1850s. She said it belonged in the research collection, not hidden in an attic. With careful hands, Natalie opened the old diary. Caroline's young handwriting filled the pages. The notes showed a complicated relationship with moments of real affection mixed with the cold reality of owning someone. Caroline had been both a friend and a jailer because that was what her society taught her. One note stood out. "Harriet looked sad today. I told her she is lucky to be my friend instead of working in the fields. She said nothing, but I saw her touching her ankle chain when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I wish she didn't have to wear it, but Mother says it is necessary. I gave her a ribbon to tie around it to make it prettier." Natalie closed the book, feeling how important it was. This was the final piece of the story. It wasn't a simple tale of good and bad people, but a human tragedy where everyone was shaped by a cruel system. She would add the diary to the archive to make sure both Harriet's and Caroline's lives were remembered. This was the true power of their work, not just finding chains, but showing the full human story of everyone trapped by the past. As she put the diary away, Natalie thought about the photo that started it all. It was an image that looked innocent at first, but once you really saw it, you could never see it the same way again. Just like history itself,